and talking about the latest iteration of a gun control bill at the Illinois Statehouse. I'm Greg Bishop with 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. And you can always follow along Bishop on Air on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Best place, though, is Twitter, where I stream a lot of different things if I come across bills, which I just came across this morning. There is a new amendment to this House bill. It's House Bill 5471, Senate Amendment 2. And we'll be going through some of this. But, of course, I want to get your phone calls at 217-629-7970. So I'm noticing this is just now filed after yesterday, the Illinois Senate's president, Don Harmon, filing legislation to control guns, and it modifies the House provision a bit. And some of the changes that were at least in the first version that was filed yesterday would ultimately, again, define assault weapons as certain semi-automatic guns, and it lists a whole bunch of those. But it would also change the House version of the prohibition on magazines. The House version started as prohibiting any more than 10 rounds in a magazine. And then when it passed the House early Friday morning, it had changed from 10 rounds to 12 rounds in a magazine. And it would also have lowered the threshold for offenses for people who have those magazines moving forward. So you're looking at a petty offense for the first violation, and then a Class 4 felony for subsequent violations. That was in the Illinois House bill, and it included a gun registry for the owners who are grandfathered in of certain semi-automatic guns. So we were looking for that particular bill, which I believe was Senate Bill 2226, if my memory is correct. A lot of bill numbers thrown around all over the place. But Senate Bill 2226 was the House version. That passed in the early morning hours of Friday morning. We talked about it on Friday. Then you had over the weekend the Senate and House canceling Saturday, but the House, they're coming back on Tuesday. The Senate came back last night, and it was thought it was going to be a long night with the possibility of the Senate taking up abortion bills and also the proposed gun ban. But then midday Sunday, we saw that there was this bill that was filed by Senate President Don Harmon that would modify things a little bit of the House version. So Senate President Don Harmon's bill does some different things, including changing the magazine prohibitions from 12 rounds or more to instead 10 rounds or more for rifles and 15 rounds or more for handguns. And that seems to allow for a lot of the standard issued handguns that are out there. If you got a semi-automatic handgun manufactured in the past 10 years, likely it's got a 14-round magazine. So it essentially is relaxing those provisions a bit to not wrap in a whole bunch of people that have handguns as right now. But there's also some questions about whether there's a gun registry in the Senate version. But even that is expected to change, as you've got the Senate Executive Committee set to hear a Senate version of gun control at 9 o'clock today. So right when we get off the air, the Senate should be acting on some kind of gun legislation. So 217-629-7970, that's the phone number. I want to hear from you, your thoughts about just the process here. But also, what do you think should happen to curb gun violence? Because that seems to be the push and the impetus of those who want gun control, is they want to curb gun violence. And in particular, not just the violence that we see regularly being reported out of Chicago, gun violence in Decatur and Springfield, Peoria, Rockford, and elsewhere, but also mass shootings like what happened on July 4th of last year in Highland Park. So this proposed gun bill, it's now got a different amendment that's been filed, and we'll go through some of this. And I'm just finding this morning as we're live on the air, so appreciate your patience in going through this, but it's a good 100 pages or so. And it has some of the same language that the other Senate version had, including creating a task force to go after gun trafficking, a strike force of sorts. That was in the House bill. But going through it as well, and when you look at legislation, you got to look for the stuff that's underlined and crossed out. That's what's changing. But it does define assault weapons. Also says the endorsement affidavit form completed pursuant to whatever section of the criminal code must be executed electronically through the individual's firearm owner identification card account. Gives state police some rules to adopt. Goes on with other changes to the current law with underlined provisions. Going through here, looking at more of and again, this is live as we just now see this bill. You're looking at it with me. It says the firearm restraining order can be renewed for an additional period of up to 1 year. That's after extending the firearm restraining order from 6 months to a full year. It goes on to talk more about that. Pouring through pages of legislation here as we're seeing it, and this all developing this morning as they prepare for a hearing in the Senate Executive Committee to take up this proposed bill. But before we go through more of this, the governor, he didn't like the Senate's version. Yesterday, after it was filed as an amendment, the governor put out a statement saying every time a weapon of war, and this is his quote, is used to inflict the maximum amount of damage in the shortest amount of time, we mourn for the lives lost and communities shattered. Enough's enough, he said. The people of this state deserve a real assault weapons ban, one that has a real accounting of the weapons currently in circulation and a real chance of ceasing the flow of more weapons of war immediately. We need a bill that meets the urgency of now, and the current version of the Senate falls short. Also, House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch saying that as Speaker of the House, I'll stand firm on our values and principles as Democrats. I will fight for the needs of Illinoisans and will not accept watered-down version of legislation that falls unacceptably short of the comprehensive solutions that the people of the state deserve. So you're seeing a bit of pushback from members of the Democratic Party against the Senate version. But let's go through and look at what we've got so far when it comes to witness slips. And this is the process that the public can have of filing opposition or support for bills. So again, the Executive Committee this morning, they are doing a subject matter on House Bill 5471, which is the gun bill. And I think they're also going to be hearing about House Bill 4664. I think that has to deal with abortion. But you've got House Bill 5471 that has a new amendment added to it. And you're looking at the witness slips here. The proponents, 40. The opponents, 5,174. That's just from the overnight hours when yesterday, late in the day in the Senate, late in the night, the Senate announced they were going to adjourn, but they were going to come back for an unscheduled day on Monday today. So they're going to go into executive committee. They're going to talk about this Senate amendment, and then they're going to go to inauguration at 11:30 with the governor and other statewide constitutional officers, and then the Senate's going to go into session at 1:30 or whenever inauguration's finished up and they can get back to the Capitol for session. And that's when it's expected they're going to be hammering these things out before Wednesday, which is the beginning of the new General Assembly. So they've got session this afternoon for the Senate. They've got session on Tuesday for the House and the Senate. And then it's got to start from scratch if they don't pass this stuff. Your thoughts on all of this? 217-629-7970. We'll get more of your calls after the break. I promise. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning, young Gregory.
What's up?
Hey, not much. Well, I hate to say it, I do disagree with the governor simply because he's using an inflammatory commentary. A weapon of war by federal law is defined as a weapon over a certain caliber, over 50 calibers, and also a weapon capable of firing fully automatic, which are already under federal law banned.
You've got to have a special federal license to be able to possess fully automatic weapons. You can go to like places in Las Vegas, even here in the state of Illinois, that people have these types of licenses and they have fully automatic weapons, but they have to go through rigorous background screening with the federal officials.
Yeah, the federal government keeps a real close tab
yes,
on those. If there's an issue, they can pull it, and they can actually go in and take the weapons without a.
There's a lot of regulations, and I appreciate the call. We got more coming in at 217-629-7970. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning, Greg. I hope they continue to look at the pistol part of the ban, because a lot of the manufacturers of any pistol, and correct me if I'm wrong, they don't make magazines that are like above, unless you're talking a 22. So when you stop it at 15, I have quite a few 22s, and those are just target pistols. That's far from any kind of an assault weapon.
But it can still do a lot of damage, and that's what people have been saying is, you can ban all these guns, but even a 22 can do some damage and kill people.
I get it. A gun's a gun, but what I'm saying is that's in general a target pistol, and a lot of those come with 16 rounds because they're such a small caliber.
Right.
So I hope they look at that, maybe put something in there that just looks at the rifle part like they seem to be doing.
Yeah.
And leave the pistols alone, because, yes, people are going to call and say, oh, yeah, you can buy a magazine that will fit in a pistol that's more. But then you're going beyond its intended purpose, and they should put something in there maybe like that beyond the manufacturer, like that's what it comes with.
Well, and here's the thing. All this is going to change just in a handful of hours here. And that's why it's important that I do what I do to keep you informed as best as possible. But again, 217-629-7970, your thoughts. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. I'm pretty sure that the FOID card has been ruled unconstitutional. And so by that being inside this new law, I'm pretty sure that's not going to stand up. Then the United States...
We lost you. Call back in. We got to take a break. We'll get more of your calls, I promise, at 217-629-7970. That's the phone number here now, 750. Got to take that break. Stay tuned. More coming.
Live now, Springfield's Morning News with Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY.
All right, we've been taking your calls about a proposed gun control bill at the Illinois Statehouse, with the state Senate having now one version, yet another version filed this morning, and we're looking at some of that, but taking your phone calls at 217-629-7970. On YouTube, a listener says under House bill, you'd need to surrender magazines. Senate bill grandfathers the pre-ban mags. And some of the language I did see in the first Senate bill included allowing for those magazines to be possessed and allowing for semi-automatic guns to be possessed, but only on private property, at a licensed gun range, at a licensed dealer, or transporting back and forth unloaded in a case. So you've got those provisions that are in the Senate bill, and that's led to Governor J.B. Pritzker saying that it's too watered down. And we'll see exactly what happens. But looking at the most recent amendment, the second Senate amendment that was filed this morning, that's expected to be heard in a Senate Executive Committee, it goes on to say that there needs to be an affidavit filed filed with state police for those so-called assault weapons. And I'm curious, though, how this rubs up against the Fifth Amendment, right? I mean, if you're going to be attesting to something that you could have that is listed as an assault weapon, does that violate your Fifth Amendment rights of self-incrimination? So interesting to see if that comes up at all. But going through the legislation here, and again, you can chime in at 217-629-7970. We've got about 3 minutes left for you to get your voice heard on this. We'll talk more about it in the next segment as well, so stay tuned. But looking at this bill, some more detail goes on to talk about the affidavit process and what needs to be included with the FOID card holder's number and what kind of weapon they have and so on. A lot of concern about creating a registry, and that could lead to confiscation is the kind of go-to argument that a lot of people in the Second Amendment support space worry about. But it goes on to talk about who's exempt from this, and that includes law enforcement, military members, jailers, Olympic athletes, and hunters and so on. But it lays out that possession of these things are allowed on personal property. Going through here, and again, this is the Second Amendment that the Senate has filed. It talks about large capacity magazines. It says that handguns in Illinois, the capacity limits would be no more than 10 rounds for a long gun and 15 rounds for handguns and ammunition magazines for handguns. Talks more about definitions and where you can hold them, private property, a licensed firearm dealer or a gun range while traveling. Also talks about what some of the penalties would be. And this is interesting because it differs from the penalties in the House version. The penalties, let me see if I can pull this up quick, going through this live on air as we just now get this. But a person who knowingly manufactures, delivers, sells, purchases, or causes to be manufactured or purchased in violation of the section is going to be given a petty offense with a fine of $1,000 for each violation. So that right there is different from the House version, which first violation was a petty offense with a $1,000 fine, but then subsequent violations were a Class 4 felony. So different there, but interesting to see how this is all going to come together with the Senate set to hear this in a Senate Executive Committee at 9 o'clock today. Then they're going to take a break for inauguration to welcome in the next round of statewide elected officials. And then at 1:30, the Illinois Senate's going to go back into session where they could take up the gun bill, plus a bill about abortion and who knows what else. It has not been lame at all for lame duck session as we rapidly approach the end of this General Assembly in the final hours. We'll bring you the latest. And of course, you can follow along Bishop on Air on Twitter. That's BISHOPONAIR on Twitter. Facebook, YouTube, like and subscribe for the live show each and every weekday morning here from 6 to 9 on WMAY. It's 8 o'clock.
From the Fly SPI studios, take the easy way out. WMAY FM, Taylorville, Springfield's news and talk is 92.7 WMAY. 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's news and talk.
All right, back taking your phone calls at 217-629-7970 about the latest movement in gun control legislation at the Illinois Statehouse for lame duck session. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk, and the phone number 217-629-7970. You can also email bishoponair@gmail.com or find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. YouTube's a good place because, well, that's where you can watch us live as we talk with newsmakers, review what happens in these various committees or on the Senate or House floor. Outside of hosting this morning show weekday mornings, I cover the State House for the Center Square and also Illinois Radio Network. But let's go ahead and get to it because we do have the latest iteration that's been filed this morning. And that is the measure to prohibit certain types of guns. And again, call in 217-629-7970. That's the phone number. But even as we were on air this morning, I looked at the Senate bill that was filed here, and it's actually a Senate amendment to House Bill 5471, and it's going to be heard this morning in a Senate Executive Committee. And looks like the witness slips so far this morning, 5,174 oppose, with 40 who support. Now it's up to 6,100 who oppose and 50 who support. So refreshing that, but I did look at the bill number, and it has another amendment that was filed this morning, and looking at what kind of changes there are compared to the previous amendment that was filed yesterday afternoon by the Senate. So we're getting your reaction to all of this and more. 217-629-7970. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Hello, this is David from Chicago. How are you doing this morning?
Oh, David, thanks for tuning in all the way from Chicago. Your thoughts on this?
So I think what's imperative here is that there is a grandfathering of the magazines. What needs to be emphasized is that by limiting the capacity to 12 rounds, or you need to surrender them to the police or take them out of state, you're effectively criminalizing 1.5 to 2 million residents across Illinois, because as some of you have mentioned, some of your previous phone callers, these guns, handguns, come standard with 15 rounds for the last 10, 15 years.
Right.
So that is a huge issue, the lack of grandfathering in the House bill.
Yeah, in the House bill, it changed from no more than 10 rounds to then no more than 12 rounds, which would have still impacted a lot of those handguns that, you know, the 2-point-some-odd million FOID card holders in the state of Illinois that go through the hoops to get that firearm owner identification card, which, by the way, led to a lot of people questioning whether their rights were being upheld during the pandemic when there was up to a year delay getting those FOID card renewals, if you guys remember all of that, and also the legal challenges against the firearm owner ID card in Illinois. There's a couple of different challenges there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually one of the plaintiffs in the delays for the concealed carry licensing, and it took my wife and several of my cousins close to a year to get their FOID cards, even though legally, according to state law, it's supposed to take only a month. So there's huge issues.
Big issue.
Even with the registration, I think, I can't remember which House representative brought this up, but with the registration, the issue is, okay, if you don't register within 300 days, suddenly you're a felon. But if with ISP being so backed up, who's to say that they would even process all the registration within 300 days, and then suddenly you're wondering whether or not you're a felon just because of plumbing issues over at ISP?
that's a great
versions of
point,
that.
and something that the ISP's already shown that I don't know if it's a lack of resources or what, but with the FOID card delays, with the concealed carry card delays, with the dropping of the ball of that clear and present danger report for the Highland Park shooting suspect, and also not going after the Aurora mass shooter suspect who had a felony in a different state, that when he applied for a concealed carry license, that's when they found it, and they never went and confiscated his guns or had him surrender his FOID card. There's all of these other factors that are out there that should be maybe looked at, but instead it seems that lawmakers are more focused on defining certain common guns as assault weapons, and then possibly making people violate their Fifth Amendment rights of not having to self-incriminate by filing with state police that you have a, quote, assault weapon. So there's a lot of questions about this, and I think that's why a lot of the Second Amendment supporters are queuing up lawsuits. They're ready to go to court over all of this and not negotiating whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, the Firearm Policy Coalition, Second Amendment Foundation, of course, the Illinois State Rifle Association, they all have lawsuits just sitting in the refrigerator waiting to put them out before Pritzker even puts down his pen. So I think the thing to emphasize here is no matter what passes out of the Senate and the House, we're going to challenge it. What is, I think, important, however, given some of the other cases that we've seen around the country, is that while we're challenging it, we don't risk becoming felons within 90 days if we don't surrender our magazines to police.
And that's what the House bill says. Yeah, the House bill says within 90 days you have to either surrender them, throw them away, give them to somebody out of state, or modify them, which... Listen, I'm not a huge gun expert or anything, but how in the world do you go about modifying a 30-round magazine for an AR-15, which people who have an AR-15 likely have at least one, if not two, three, or four 30-round magazines for their AR-15s? How do you do that? I don't even know.
You can't. I mean, it's clear these legislators don't understand how the magazines work, but I mean, I guess you can put in a base plate, but again, what the law says is that you need to permanently alter these magazines. There's no way to permanently get rid of space in them. They're just cylinders or big rectangles. Right. So you change out the base plate, but you can still just get rid of the base plate, and then you have a magazine that can hold 30, 40, 100, whatever it is. Yeah. There's no way to permanently change the magazines.
Well, David from Chicago, I appreciate you calling in. What do you think's going to happen here? Do you think that the Senate's going to pass what the governor says is a watered-down version, and then the House is going to not want to take that up, and it's going to be deadlock until the end of this legislative session when they have to throw everything out and start over from scratch on Wednesday?
So reading the tea leaves here from what I'm hearing out of the Senate and the governor's office and Welch's office is it seems like the big holdup isn't necessarily the grandfathering of the magazines at this point, but what everybody seems to be referencing is that the assault weapon ban, quote unquote, doesn't have teeth because it lacks the registration of serial numbers of existing guns. So where I'd be putting my money now is that the House will give some way in regards to the magazines. However, they'll probably dig in their heels in regards to the registration of existing quote-unquote assault weapons across the state. That would be where I think it's the rubber meets the road.
Well, we're going to watch it closely. David, I appreciate the call from Chicago here with Springfield's Morning News. And again, the latest iteration of the Senate's proposal filed this morning. They have a Senate Executive Committee at 9 o'clock this morning. Then it's inauguration of the governor and other statewide executive officers like Comptroller, Treasurer, Secretary of State, and Attorney General. And then the Senate's going to go back into session today. It was not scheduled that they would be in, but they went ahead and scheduled that for today. At 1:30, they'll go into session. It could take up the gun bill. They could take up a bill about abortion, so it might be a long day for the Senate. And then Tuesday is the final day of the House and Senate for the 102nd General Assembly, and they could go all the way up until the hour before January 11th when the new General Assembly is seated, the 103rd General Assembly is seated. So it's going to be a really kind of high-flying, jam-packed adventure, and I'll be covering it all, and we'll be talking about it all week long here with Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk.